The reason they like reading my stuff is that I've always got real-life examples to prove what I'm saying.
There's a lot of good people that listen to this podcast.
Other than God and my family, deer hunting would be next in line on my list of priorities.
From the bottom of our hearts, it's just fantastic and awesome to have the support that you guys are getting.
People ask me about expandable broadheads and love swings.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to Chasing Giants, episode 155, in front of a live audience. We have a building full of our closest friends from Northern Ohio, Don.
I'm going to guess there's probably 500 people here. I was told there's seating for 450, and the seats are pretty much full with standing room in the back. So we're pushing 500 people here, Terry.
Northern Ohio, actually the whole state of Ohio, has been really good to us over the years. We've done a lot of shows, several live podcasts, but everywhere we go in the Buckeye state, even though I'm a Kentucky boy, the Ohio friends of ours support us, and we appreciate that.
I spend a lot of time on the road in various states consulting, doing seminars and such. And I spend more time in Ohio than any other state except for Illinois, where I live. Lots of friends here in Ohio.
Yep, lots of friends. So we have a live podcast. We're going to take live heated questions. I feel like we're going to get blindsided at least once tonight, because I made the announcement just a little bit ago that there is a $100 bill laying on this table up here for the best question of the night to put you on the spot. Our host for the night, Ray and Aiden from Northern Ohio here, are our host at their business, and they are going to be the official judge and jury for who is the best question. So all appeals can be sent their way. Don't ask Don and I, because we don't have anything to do it.
Let's give a shout-out to Ray and Aiden from A&M Gutters. These guys have a business where they manufacture gutter guards right here in this building where we're at. They are the biggest supplier on Amazon of gutter guards. They've got the best gutter guards out there. If you are in the construction or gutter installation business, you need to look up A&M Gutters and check out their gutter guards. These guys got it figured out. They're great friends of ours, great friends of the podcast, great friends of Lester's Feet. They support everything we do, and just hoping that we can help support them.
You mentioned Lester's Feet. Not only have they donated big time to the raffles, not only with prizes, but donating from themselves and the business. They're too shy to bring this up. When I've talked about families or something that needed something from a construction side, these are the first guys that give me a call and say, let us know what we can do. So on behalf of Chasing Giants and the Lester's Feet board, thank you, guys. We really appreciate it. Everybody give these guys a round of applause. I think he's blushing. What do you think?
Well, let's ask him up here to give a speech.
Yeah, how about a speech there, Ray? No, he's waiting.
He's going to have no part of that.
All right, well, everybody's kind of getting their questions ready. I feel the anticipation of either political broadheads or I don't know what we're going to fit tonight, but I'm guessing we're going to get something. But to start the show out, I want to talk about a video that you dropped this week, and it's probably one of the best educational pieces I've ever seen you guys put together. Steve Shields, who produced the Mel video, who this audience just watched, is just the best in the business when it comes to video production. But you and him put together a very, very good, unbiased educational video about native versus non-native, invasive versus invasive, and talk a little bit about that. And I think the best thing to do, I was watching this again last night where we stayed. The audio, you don't even need the video of that video. You all did such a good job producing it. I think we're going to put the audio of that content at the back end of this podcast. So all of our friends listening on MTech, even though they won't be able to see the graphics that Steve did, the audio is perfectly explaining it. So stick around for the end of this podcast episode. There's going to be a video about what Don's getting ready to talk about.
Yeah, so there's a push out there from some all-natural extremists, if you will, that think that...
Tree huggers.
Pretty much. I was trying to be nice, and there you go. But
I'll start it off with a bang.
They think that we shouldn't introduce any plant or animal to this country that's not native of this country. Well, I did some research, and I pretty much blew them out of the water when I discovered where all of these different plants that we plant come from.
Every day.
Every day. Apple trees, not native to this country. Pear trees, not native to this country. And the list goes on and on. What we plant in our food plots. I listed 15 of the most common things we plant in our food plots, every single one of them not native to this country. And I think the whole, I totally understand not introducing invasive species. Totally get it. But just because a plant is not native does not mean it's invasive. And in fact, some native plants are more invasive than some of our non-native plants. And I just tried to cover that in a way that made sense, that people would understand and kind of shed some light on that topic. And I shared it on my social media, but for whatever reason, it was kind of suppressed. And I think there's some kind of friction there between Facebook and YouTube. And if you even mention the word YouTube in your post, it gets suppressed. So there's a lot of people that did not get to see that. So you might want to go look for it.
Yep. I can play around with that the next coming days. We had a strategy on how we were going to release this content. But again, we've borderline received hate mail, wishes that we go to hell, almost threats for bad things happen against our family about this. You took a deep breath, blocked a lot of people on social media, and then produced this video. I can't be more proud of you for how you responded to it, but I'm telling you, it's probably one of the best education pieces that you've put out and set the bar for the Whitetail Master Academy to continue educating like that. So excited for at least the people who haven't seen it or heard it. They're gonna at least be able to listen to it at the end of this show.
Yeah, and for the people who are wondering how this became such a big deal with us, it was because of miscanthus. The fact that Real World sells miscanthus, and miscanthus is not a native plant. Some of these extremist tree huggers, as Terry calls them,
liberal tree huggers.
Yeah, I mean, they was like sharing my contact info on these just real radical pages, and I was being inundated by a bunch of just crazies. I literally
people
probably
that weren't
blocked,
even hunters.
Yeah, they weren't even hunters. They're just nutcases. But I had to block like 300 of them from my Facebook page over a course of a couple days, and that's where the whole issue started with, was their objection to miscanthus, which is not at all invasive. But I think I kind of addressed it in a way that made sense.
Yep. So for those of you, again, check this out at the end of the podcast if you're listening on MTech or any of the call-in shows. I haven't seen any hands raised up, so make sure you're getting your hands as Ray and Aiden split up and go to each side of it to get your question. I'm going to pick your brain about one thing specific to this time of year. We talk about fetal programming, and we've talked a lot with Dr. Bronson Strickland as he's been on the show. Fetal programming is so vital. So that doe right now, Don, is carrying the fawn inside of her, hopefully 2 fawns, maybe 3 fawns. But at what point is fetal program locked? So we understand what we talked about. At the time of conception, that DNA code is written. And I think the glass ceiling is kind of set at that time it's written, but how far we get to that glass ceiling is about the nutrition that we're feeding our does right now. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think the key is for that doe to be on the highest nutritional plane possible before she ever conceives, which would have been, during the rut last November. But, we're still a long ways from when those fawns are being born, so I think you can still have some impact, but not to the degree that you could have had if that doe would have, had that high nutrition, before conception. So it's not too late, but it should have been started months ago.
Yeah, so nutrition before conception tells us where the glass ceiling is at. Nutrition after conception to birth tells us how close we're going to get to the glass ceiling.
Right.
And it's no different than our wives taking prenatal vitamins when she was pregnant with our kids. It's getting that boost or that head start. No different than livestock, that nutrition when we're breeding horses or cattle, it's the same thing.
Right, exactly. And, for those that are just hearing this term for the first time, fetal programming basically is the female, when she becomes pregnant, is setting that fetus up for life. And if her nutrition is not there, then that fetus, once it's born, there's nothing that can be done to make up for what it did not get before conception. So we want to make sure that female's on a high nutritional plane when she conceives.
So we're the only people in the hunting industry that's going to look out at a crowd like this and be honest with you. You're not going to walk a trade show and find a bucket with some big buck or blonde bimbo on it, and they're going to turn a 5'8" guy into a 7'2" Shaquille O'Neal just because you feed him something out on the floor. You can improve the health of that animal as it goes, but you are not going to take the genetic makeup of a 140-inch deer and turn him into a booner. That genetic code was written at the time of conception. So what we're doing with our does through the fall and through this time is the most pivotal thing we can. All right, we got our first question back there. Do a sound check. Tap your hand on that mic. Make sure I can hear it okay. All right, we're good.
The best way to age a buck off of a trail camera picture?
Good question.
There's no way to age a buck from a picture. Whoever started that ought to have their head smacked because there's just no way to do it. Now, you can tell a 1.5-year-old buck, and you can generally tell a 2-year-old buck, but once they hit 3 on, there is no way to look at a picture and tell how old a buck is. If you ever hear me mention a buck's age, it's because I watched that buck grow up from the time he was young, and I'm just adding years. To look at a picture and age a buck is impossible.
Have you ever been fooled?
Been fooled by what?
Thinking a buck had a guess on how old he was, and then he ended up either being a whole lot younger or a whole lot older?
Usually, I've been fooled a couple times. Actually, you shot a buck on my place that I thought was a 3-year-old, and he ended up being 5 when you sent the teeth in. It just shows, and I thought I had history with the buck. I just misgauged him all along, so you can't age a buck from a picture. Don't let anybody fool you.
All right. We got somebody else ready? Don't make me edit out awkward silence. So, they're in the back, so you got to raise your hand and they'll come forward.
So my question is, what is the best way to see a buck that only comes out during the night? How can you get that buck to come out during the day or an evening shot when there's still enough daylight out?
So you got a nocturnal buck and you want him there in daylight, huh?
That's right.
Okay.
You got to hunt closer to where he's bedding.
Okay.
And that might be not even on the property you're hunting. He may be bedded on another property. I tell my consulting clients all the time that the first thing I look for on a property is where are we going to bed these deer? We got to get them bedded on that property. If your buck is bedded one property over from where you're hunting, your odds of killing that deer are 10% what they are if you're on the same property. So if you're only seeing him at night or only getting pictures of him at night, odds are that you're not close enough to his bed. So, move trail cameras, whatever you got to do to figure out where that buck's spending his daylight hours.
So you got to understand that the guy that just answered the question that it's all about bedding owns a food plot seed company, and he didn't just try to sell you feed or food plot seed. It's all about that bedding. All right. You're good.
I have had conversations with quite a few wildlife biologists about goldenrod. And, most of them say it's great cover. I'm not a big fan of it because it's allelopathic, and I don't see deer consuming a lot of that plant. So I'd rather have them plant something that not only gives them the cover, but might be a food source for them. What's your feelings on goldenrod?
Well, goldenrod makes pretty decent cover early in the fall, but this time of the year it's terrible cover. I have a little bit different approach. I like to keep my food and my cover totally separate. because that helps me to create huntable travel patterns. If a buck, all he has to do is stand up from his bed in his bedding cover and drop his head and start eating, he's hard to kill. But if he's bedding on one side of your property and all the food's on the other side of the property, he's got to move to that food. So I just like to keep the bedding cover and the food sources separate as much as possible.
It makes my face swell up really big when I bush hog it, I can tell you that.
Is there something you would prefer over the goldenrod?
Switchgrass.
Okay.
Yep.
The second question I have, as you were talking about the does and the importance of their fertility and the quality early on, and I've had this discussion with quite a few, and seen some studies on it. Our area might be different than your area, given the fact that we're so hilly. We have to deal with inversion layers. What's your feelings on a preferred bedding area for deer during the heavy part of the winter when there's a decent amount of snow on the ground?
Well, my region of the country doesn't get a lot of snow, but when it comes to mature bucks, the one thing they want more than anything is freedom of human intrusion. They'll bed in a wide open woods, or I've even seen them bedded in wide open fields during gun season when there seems to be pressure in all the cover. They're gonna seek out the place they have within their range where there's the least amount of human intrusion. We got two guys fighting over the mic. Two buddies are fighting over the mic.
I was wondering if you were the wildlife biologist and you two are going to get into it over here. Is that what's going on?
Is it worth $100? I got a question on the rope scrapes. The correct off the ground is 2 foot, correct?
Well, I think it needs to be a little bit higher than 2 foot. I'm thinking 3 to 3.5.
Okay.
If you have it 2 foot off the ground, you're going to have every coon in the woods swinging from it.
All right. Another question is, why wouldn't more of those on your property be better to keep bucks on your property from going from one to the next? You kind of use them just for taking pictures.
Right. Well, I suppose there might be some validity to that. You know, if you're trying to get inventory, you know, if you've got 2 or 3 ropes on your property and those bucks are going to concentrate on those 2 or 3 ropes, so if you got 10, you know, you're going to have 10 cameras, one on each rope. Again, there's probably some validity to your thought, but I don't know that it's necessary.
I think the one thing that most Ohio residents don't understand about how we use rope scrapes in Illinois is we can use no attractant, no feed, no mineral. So that in Ohio and in Kentucky, we can throw out a pile of corn and get every buck or deer that's on the property eventually, even if it's a picture at night. In Illinois, we have no way to use any type of attractant there. So that's the best way we have to get everything to come there to get our inventory. So I don't think many people from Ohio or Kentucky realize that that's our best way of knowing what's on that farm, because it's a bulletin board, for lack of better terms. That's the deer's Facebook.
Well, where I'm from in New York, you're not allowed to bait either.
So okay.
I was just thinking that if you had more scrapes and kept your bucks more on your property during hunting season, not just for looking at them, do you think that would be worth putting more of them to keep the deer there on your property longer?
Well, I don't think it would hurt anything, as long as you're not going in and, you know, doctoring them up, checking your trail cameras over them and everything else. With anything, there's a tipping point where you take it too far. So your property starts at this level and you do various projects and you just bring that property up. But at some point, there's a tipping point where, boom, you've gone too far, you put too much pressure on your property, and your property is actually worse than where you started. And that's the human intrusion factor. And a good example is, you know, I speak out a lot of times about water holes. Now, I'm not against water holes whatsoever. I think they're a good thing, actually. But the problem I have with water holes is a lot of these guys are going in and putting, you know, a stock tank or a kiddie pool or whatever, and then they got to go in once a week or whatever and fill it up. And it's that human intrusion going in all the time to fill that up that is a bigger negative than the positive that the water source is. So you actually are ended up with a worse property than if you'd done nothing at all.
Follow what you're saying there, and I'm a believer of just staying out of the property totally as much as I can and do. But I thought about putting these rope scrapes in now, say 20 or I've got 200 acres, put 20 or 30 of them in and not bother them, just leave them there to keep more deer going from one to the next when the rut does come in the hunting season.
Yep.
I think that's a good plan.
Yep.
All right.
And I actually was on a property one time where I'm telling you what, this guy had more rope scrapes. I mean, he must have had a spool of rope that was 6 feet around, because a monkey could have got from one side of that property to the other just swinging from rope to rope.
Hey, I don't think I told this story on the podcast. I did a consulting visit east of Cincinnati. Did I tell this story?
I don't think so.
I never can remember. And we're going in this. I mean, it's real hill country. You know, my kind of property. Just a lot of hills, a lot of woods. It's what I like. And they had this barn from the 1800s, and I'm like, I want to go visit this, go up inside this barn just because I'm fascinated by it. You know, rock foundation with a basement, and I wanted to see the hand-hewn beams up, 30 feet up in the air. And I turn and walk into the barn, and Austin has seen it. There was a spool of 2-inch rope. I mean, a big spool sitting in it, and it was like finding the mother lode, and the client let me cut a bunch of it off and take it home. So, Denny, thanks for all the ropes. So we got a question back here in the back. There you go.
Is chronic wasting disease a big threat to our deer population?
I think chronic wasting disease is a political disease, the same as COVID. Now, they're both real, but our politicians I shouldn't even say our politicians. They've been politicized to the point that you don't even know what to believe.
Let her have it.
I don't think it's a threat. Personally, if it was a threat to our deer herd, CWD was discovered in 1967.
Yep.
In Fort Collins, Colorado, in a government research pen of mule deer. And if it was such a terrible disease, 67, how many years ago was that? That's 45 years ago or so. No, it's 50.
Why are you looking at me to do math?
I thought you had more fingers and toes than I did. But if it was such a threat, why do we still have mule deer in Colorado? I mean, why didn't it wipe them out? I mean, what was it, like 20 years ago they discovered CWD east of the Mississippi at Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, and it was such a terrible thing. 20 years later, we're still sitting here saying it's a terrible thing, but we still got as many deer as we've ever had. It's the same. These same nut jobs that come up with this stuff are the same people that think miscanthus is invasive and is going to take over the countryside, when right next to him is a red cedar tree that has 5 million little red cedars growing around it, and red cedar's a native. That's the same nut jobs that think these giant windmills are our answer to energy. That's the same idiots that think that electric cars, are the answer to the future. You can just go on and on. It's all politics. It's politics. It's all it is. And that's my opinion on CWD.
If you don't believe it's politics, that we shared this video. There is a video out there on YouTube that talks about CWD and using humic acid to adjust the pH in the deer's bloodstream. And they went from 100% mortality rate to 100% survival rate. And the does were even breeding fawns that were then immune to CWD just by adjusting their pH. And this should have 10 million views out there, and they suppress this thing to where even if we manually share it, they keep pulling it back. Apple Creek Whitetails, I believe in Michigan, was the ones that found this, and just by putting humic acid, they're adjusting the pH. And I know for a fact there's a couple hospitals actually studying blood pH as it relates to human neurological diseases like Alzheimer's, what's the other one?
Dementia.
So I think it's a lot more political than what people are giving it credit for.
I think the solution to CWD is probably nutrition. And the reason I say that is you can I haven't seen the maps lately, but a few years ago, you could take a map of where CWD is in the United States, where it's popped up, and then you could take these soil maps. They have different maps for different nutrients, like the iron in the soil, for example, or the copper in the soil. And you could almost there was like 2 or 3 nutrients that were deficient in these certain areas, and you could almost overlay that CWD map on it. And, it was almost uncanny how closely they matched. My guess, and I'm no scientist, I want to make that very clear, and nor do I ever want to be. But my guess is that the answer to CWD is probably nutrition-based, and yet these anti-CWD people, I don't even know how to describe them, but they seem to take the opposite approach. They want to ban supplemental feeding because it spreads CWD. Well, actually, that might be the answer. It might be nutrition. And captive deer breeders have actually done probably the best research on CWD, and there's actually a gene that some deer are almost immune to CWD if they carry that certain gene, and yet the government don't want to hear anything about it. These states get federal funding for CWD issues, combating CWD, and they don't want to find a cure because then that cuts off the federal funding for all these tree huggers to sit in a blind out in a field and sharpshoot deer off a bait pile in the middle of the night with thermal imaging scopes. That's their answer. Wipe them out. In my home state of Illinois, if there is a deer found with CWD, the state of Illinois, their answer to it is to come in with sharpshooters, and for 5 years, in a 2-mile radius of wherever that CWD was found, 2-mile radius, every direction, they want to kill every single deer for 5 years. Totally wipe them out for 5 years. And they use sharpshooters and bait piles to do that. Nobody else can use bait, but those guys can. And yet these same people are telling us that the CWD prion lives in the soil for thousands of years. Now, what the heck is shooting deer for 5 years going to do to combat something that lives in the soil for thousands of years? I'm going to get on a tirade here in a second.
Have at it.
A few years ago, I had my state senator from my area introduce a bill in Illinois to allow supplemental feeding outside of hunting season. It was not going to be allowed during hunting season. It was just outside of season. He met with the DNR. The DNR was opposed to it. So my senator met with the DNR over this to see what their objections were. This isn't secondhand stuff here, folks. I was involved with this. After my state senator left that meeting with the IDNR, he's driving home. He calls me as he just left that meeting. He calls me, not somebody else. This ain't third-hand stuff. He calls me, and he tells me that it was the most unbelievable meeting he was ever in. He said those people were not a bit concerned about disease spreading. Those people were concerned about sharpshooters being unemployed. That was their big concern. What are we going to do with these sharpshooters if we're not out there shooting deer all night long? That was their main concern, and that was their objection to allowing baiting.
Send them to the Mexico border.
Well, I'll tell you what, the politics of this country are just ridiculous. Yeah, actually, you got a good point. Okay, you get the $100 bill so far.
We're back banned off YouTube again.
What's your opinion on the Mexican border?
That needs a giant wall with Donald Trump on top of it with whatever weapon he wants.
Do you try to figure out the exact location of a target buck on a property?
The exact location, like you mean where he beds, or not necessarily? No, I just want to know. I mean, close. I mean, I want to know he's bedding in that thicket or that ridge or whatever, but I don't need to know the exact spot that he's.
This is the conversation we had we were talking last night at the table, and talking about the biggest thing people do wrong. And we think we had this conversation for probably 20 minutes last night. Hunters, especially hunters with trail cameras, try to put so much intrusion to find that this buck is staying right there and I have to go hunt him there, versus adapt the habitat to where he's going to come where I have access. You really want to know how to kill that buck, leave him alone where he's there, because where he's at, you're probably not going to get in there and kill him. You're going to bump him. You have to go in this time of year, and that's what we worked on it all day today. You know, you're figuring out how to change that habitat to funnel him to a point where you have access, where you're not intrusion on your farm, and that he's going to come by that you can shoot him. I don't care that he's right there. I just want to make sure he's coming by me in an area that I can get in and out without spooking anything. You got to know where he's bedding. What property he's bedding on.
I think that one thing, a common, I shouldn't call it a mistake, but I think a lot of land managers, I guess I'll call it a mistake they make is that they want to go in and they want to hunt the deer doing what the deer are doing, today. So there's a deer trail over there. I'm going to put my stand over there by that deer trail. Well, we go in and we manipulate what those deer are doing. We get them to do what we want. We don't want to go in there because to go in there and hunt him, the wind is going to kill us every time. There's no good access for us to get in there. And once we do get in there, there's no wind. But we can hunt him over here. So we need to manipulate our property to get that deer to go where we want him, and then he's killable.
So I just bought a property in April that I'm setting up. Would you go in when there's snow on the ground and look for beds and that kind of thing, or would you just stay out?
I don't really care where they bed, to be honest. I care where they travel between their bed and the food. It kind of goes back to the question we had earlier. That's why I want that food totally separate. One thing I like to do is plant soft mass-bearing trees, apples, pears, persimmons, but I don't want to scatter them all over the property. I want to concentrate it. Instead of creating a food plot, I want to create a feeding area, a concentrated area with diverse food sources. I want my fruit trees right at the edge of my food plot. If I'm supplemental feeding in a state like Ohio where you can, I want that feeder right there next to that food plot. I want all that food concentrated, because when a deer stands up, I don't care where he's standing up at. I want him coming here. And that makes a huntable travel pattern. I don't care where he's bedding. He can bed on the neighbors, although I'd rather him bed on me, but that food source is what's going to pull him in.
All right. Good question. Still $100 up
at
for
the back there.
$100 still up for grabs.
Hap right here in the.
He's got one in the back first.
Oh, sorry.
My question was on the pecking order for the does, the bucks, especially the call bucks. Do you have information on a pecking order?
No. I think a lot of times you know what the dominant buck is, but after that, I think it's pretty tough to.
Is that the king buck?
The king buck, he's always at the top. It doesn't matter. No, I think a lot of times you can tell the most dominant buck on the property, but I think after that, it's not like you can put them in order 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on.
Does every buck have a personality just like a human? You could have a nasty 3-year-old.
Yep, they do. I think that's one of the things that a lot of deer hunters don't give bucks enough credit for, is that each buck has a different personality, and you got to kind of adjust your approach to his personality.
All right.
What happens when that pecking order in September is in place, and then they start changing into the fall range? Don't they knock each other's heads off at that point?
They work it out. Most of the time, it's not a super aggressive fight. They shove each other around a little bit. And
you're good.
Don. On your podcast, you and Joe Miles?
Yeah.
And Terry were talking about aging, like the older a deer gets, if he what's the right word for it?
They were talking about how the older the buck gets, the easier it sometimes is to kill him.
It is to kill. Do you think, like after they're 6 or 7 years old, and other big bucks move in the area, do you feel he drops his guard because he's not the king buck anymore or the dominant buck? Or do you think it's because of his age?
Well, I think to put it in human terms, what happens a lot of times when we get older, we oftentimes don't travel like we did when we was younger. We stay closer to home. Our range shrinks. And
my wife says I'd rather have a nap and a bowl of Cheetos at this point in my life. I don't know what to think about that.
Well, as long as you're still the king buck at your house, that's all that matters. But yeah, I don't know. I don't claim to know how these bucks work everything out between them. But, a lot of times I try to think of an analogy to compare it to in human terms. And I think as these bucks get older, they don't have the interest in the rut that they did before. A good example was last year. There was a buck on my place that was 8.5 years old, and I'd watched him since he was 2.5. That's why I'm saying he was 8.5. He had a pattern for the first 6 years of his life until he was 6.5 years old. That buck would summer off of my farm, and he would show up for the first time in mid-October. Well, that changed when he was 7.5. And when he finally showed up at 7.5, he didn't show up until December. And when he did, he didn't bet. He'd always before, he'd ran with the rest of the herd, But when he showed up as an older buck, he was bedding in the corner of a switchgrass field all by himself. He didn't even hang out with the other deer. He got older. I guess it's a grumpy old man. Some of us grumpy old men, we don't want to deal with the neighborhood punks. We just slap them up the side of the head. And I think some of them old bucks, they don't want to deal with the young bucks.
The 10-year-old was a little like that, too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
Terry, I got a question for you.
Okay.
Did you ever plant that telephone pole and put that ladder stand on it?
I didn't, but I bought the telephone pole. I need to take an auger in there.
I remember that.
Yeah, for those who don't, we talked about a place on that I have phenomenal access on my farm. My farm is an old dairy farm, and there's an old fence row that has some very small cedars that are pretty tall, but they're not even big enough around to put a ladder stand in, and I have phenomenal access coming from the back side that I want to be able to hunt this next spring, and I'm going to take an auger in there and put a telephone pole and put a lock-on stand in the middle of the cedar, so the cedar's still going to be up above me. I'll be right in it, but I'll still be about 14 feet up. But I have the telephone pole. I have acquired it. I just need to take the auger in there.
When you were hunting that buck, if I remember right, when I listened to your podcast, he was walking through how many fields to get to your NutriCrave corn?
Well, when I say a field, it's still one big field, but it's multiple plots in it. So the ridge is about 600 yards long. So he walked through 4 different products from his bed to get to NutriCrave, including green soybeans. I still had some green soybeans in it.
So you guys are saying the NutriCrave corn is probably better maybe than the beans, or it's good?
They will wipe it out, and it doesn't matter what time of the year it is. That's the first thing that gets wiped out.
I didn't believe it at first, what he was saying. But when you see deer get up out of your bed and you have, I have every product Real World makes on this ridge, and I can sit there up on top and watch the deer come. They feed in everything every night. But for some reason, when they get up, they'll walk by a high-protein feeder. They'll walk through soybeans. They'll walk through clover, and they go into that corn for a period of time before they filter out. I've never seen anything like it on my place to where no matter what, they go there first. The problem's going to be, for every brutal honesty, if you don't put enough acres of this out with heavy deer numbers, they will wipe it out. Mm-hmm. So you better be ready. And if that happens, it's still a good thing. You've kept those deer on your property versus your neighbors for all of early season, right? You just better be careful, be ready to go in there and mow that down and put in a fall plot if that's what if that's what happens. But you got to have acres of this stuff if you got big deer numbers.
That NutriCrave deer corn, I'm telling you, it's a game changer, especially in a state like Ohio, Kentucky, where you can have corn out. If your neighbor's got regular corn and you've got NutriCrave, you're pulling the deer. And we actually, Terry did a test. Well, I sent him some of that speckled corn that you've seen the pictures of, because I can't feed it in Illinois, so I sent it to Terry to test in Kentucky. And I don't know, you can describe how you did it.
I just poured it in 3 piles. I had Roundup Ready corn, NutriCrave, and then the cross-pollinated corn. And, I mean, it's easy to tell which one they eat first, and it just gravitates. I haven't seen anything like that. Boy, this is going back a long way, telling how products fail. Many years ago, we found a way to get the byproduct from when they put soybeans in a rendering machine and squeezed all the oil out. We actually found a way to acquire the byproduct of that. And I forget what was the protein in that, like 42%. I mean, it's a concentrated protein block. And we found that stuff and we started testing it. It's the only thing since then that I've seen deer gravitate to. The problem with that product, it was like a dry sponge, and as soon as it got moisture, and then it would fermented or molded or rotted. So we never sold it. But this is the first thing since then, which that was what, 6-7 years ago,
it's been a while.
8 years ago, that I've seen where they just gravitate to it. They walked. I'm not kidding. They walked past my high protein feeder that they've eaten out of for generations. Same place, same feeder, same feed, and would walk into the corn before they'd hit the feeder. Never seen anything like it. All right, next question. Where we at?
So I have a question. With your knowledge and your background and all that you've learned using private property and being able to control a lot of the variables to kill a giant buck, how can someone like myself that hunts a lot of public be able to use that information, especially when I hear like you kill a buck within the first couple of days and you don't bother an area, and it seems like I'm crunching a lot of hours and more playing on the luck side of things to kill a nice buck. How much of that, in your view, coming from your perspective and your history of everything, is it possible that you can use some of that to still be able to kill a big buck? Let's say trail cameras, some of the things like the pressure you don't really know, being able to consistently try to figure out where that buck is bedding, some of those things and you can't really manipulate where the deer go through. Is that something that you can consistently do, or is it more on the luck side?
Well, I think you can do it. I don't know if you can consistently do it on public land. But the key, without a doubt, is trail cameras. That's going to give you, like the same time, same place idea. That if that buck's still alive, he's probably going to be at the same place next year at the same time he was this year. I mean, not down to the minute. Don't take it literal. But that time of the season, if it's the first week of November, well, next year, the first week of November, he's going to be there. And trail cameras are the biggest game changer I've ever seen in 40-some years of deer hunting. They almost make killing big deer easy. Almost.
How often would you recommend checking a trail camera? Because it seems like when it comes to the rut, I want to check it. I don't know what kind of bucks are really in the area, so it seems like I'm checking it too much, like every 2 weeks, or do I want to try to stay out? Because I'm fighting with my mind, like, I know every other hunter is stomping through here, but I've also got to know what's here and what kind of bucks are there. And I know that there is some history with some bucks, but sometimes they don't show up until the rut. Mm-hmm. So it's like I'm going against two things at once.
Well, you can definitely check them too often. I typically check my cameras on average probably once every month and a half, every 6 weeks or so. But when it comes to public land, you need to pattern the hunters as much as you do the deer, because I guarantee you the bucks are pattern the hunters. And to be honest, I think some of the best public land hunting, everybody's walking past it. They're trying to go deep. I want to go deeper than the next guy into this public property. but nobody wants to. There's an area close to the road, close to parking lots or whatever, that people just seem to ignore. They think that is just, I mean, there would never be a buck there. Well, that's exactly where a buck wants to be because nobody's going to bother him there. And I would just put trail cameras in these places where you don't expect other hunters. Forget about the deer. Forget about the bucks. Forget about the buck sign. Just think, where could I put this camera where I'm not likely to catch a human? And that's where you're going to be most likely to catch a mature buck.
All right, good question. You got one over there?
Hey, this is definitely a nutritional question, being a guy who likes Cheetos on the couch. I wondered, what is your favorite venison recipes?
We've got a local processor that makes the best deer bacon I've ever had. Put some jalapeno in it.
B&M Custom.
Yeah, B&M Custom Venison. And I shot a doe this year, and I had that whole doe made into bacon, 70 pounds of bacon. And he thought that was crazy. And I said, well, shoot, that's only about a little over a package a week. That'll get me by till next year.
Yeah, Brian Teets. He was actually in the Mel video, so if you all watched that video and they were pulling it out of the truck, his wife was doing it, and Don reached in and grabbed it. That's their business. All of us that hunt up in East Central Illinois take our deer there. So great guy, great family, and I'm telling you, his Slim Jims are fantastic too. He makes these little Slim Jims. You freeze them and then lay them underneath the seat of your truck when you're driving, and they thaw just enough to eat. Good stuff.
And then you forget them for a month, and you wonder what that smell is.
All right, where are we at? Here we go.
First of all, thank you guys for coming out and spending the evening with us. Really appreciate the information.
Thank you.
I'd like you to touch on buck to doe ratio. And second question real quick would be what your strategy is if you would make a mistake and spook or know that buck that you're chasing winded you and what you would do.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Buck to doe ratio, I think that probably nobody in this room needs to worry about it because I don't think any of us own enough property that we're really going to influence it. You can't influence on that small of a scale. You know, like even if you own 1,000 acres, you could shoot 50 does and here comes 60 from your neighbors to replace them. To manage for buck to doe ratios, it's got to be done on a larger scale, almost a statewide scale. Now, if you're down in Texas on some of those bigger ranches, especially if they got a fence around them, then you can start really worrying about the buck to doe ratio. But the people that need to be worrying about buck to doe ratios and doing something about it are our state biologists, the ones that are making the state regulations. There's nothing that us as a private landowner with the properties here in the Midwest being the size they are, we're going to have zero influence. We can try as hard as we want. We're going to have zero influence on buck to doe ratios. It's just going to be what it's going to be for us. As far as what I would do if I spooked a buck, well, I definitely feel that if I spook a buck from a particular stand, I'm never killing that buck from that stand. I got to figure out something else. I got to move that stand. I may only have to move it 30 yards.
A mature buck especially.
A mature buck.
3-year-old you might get rid of away with.
If he's mature, you got to move. I just feel. I mean, there's no absolutes in deer hunting. There's going to be exceptions to the rule. Somebody's going to say, I spooked this buck, and then I shot him a week later from the same tree. Yeah, that happens. But if you're going to play the odds, and I'm always playing the odds, you got to move your stand at least 30 yards or so.
But that same philosophy is why access is so important. You bump something at your stand, you can move your stand. So how many of you in this room have one place you can park or you can get access on your farm? I have one place that I hunt. I can access on my farm. If I walk in and blow that deer out, I'm done. Very, very, very small likelihood from that point. I'm scanning. Who's got it? Oh, there you go. Go ahead. I got
the
you.
ODNR just last week down in Mount Hope said they did a survey, and in Ohio, it's about 1.5 to 2 to 1 buck to doe ratio. You think that's close, or?
Oof.
I was surprised. Everybody was.
My guess would be there's absolutely no way, but hey, I like the government, so I bet they're right.
He always trusts the government.
Okay. So I've got a question on what kind of tree or product or conifer, I'll explain, to plant. On one of my hunting properties, there was a 3-acre little parcel that touched against the southern edge of my sanctuary. And I do not go in that sanctuary unless I'm on the blood trail of a big buck or it's right after season, period. And I do a really, really good job at that sanctuary. And that's the engine that drives the whole place. But there's a 3-acre little triangle piece of property at the end of a development, and it wasn't for sale, but it got bought. It wasn't publicly for sale, and they built a house there. And when they cleared that out, it was thick brush that bedded up to a little hidden ridge off of my sanctuary. And that ridge is one heck of a spot to kill a big buck, but you couldn't go in there very often. Well, they built up against it. That ridge is done for. And I can literally shoot an arrow from me to you into their yard now. So I haven't even gotten in that stand this year. I have to pull it. So I bought 1,000 Norway spruce. I got about 500 of them planted. I double rowed them immediately, but that's going to take some time in a shaded environment. What product can I put between that house and that edge of the sanctuary? Because during the wintertime, this big 2-story house out of glass, they're like in a perfect deer stand looking through my whole property. If they'll let me hunt off their roof, I'd like to. But what can I plant that would grow in a semi-shaded environment and grow quick?
I know what this
is. It is semi-wet. It is wet in the low spot and drier up high, so it is wet and dry.
I don't have a good answer for that one.
Steel post with a 6-foot fence on it.
Yeah, privacy fence. Well, yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot of trees, especially trees that are going to provide cover that'll grow in the shade. I mean, you got your understory trees, your red buds and dogwoods and things like that will grow understory, but they're going to provide very little cover. And especially a conifer. I don't know of a conifer that's going to grow in the shade like that. Mm-hmm.
All right. Aiden, you got one back there?
With your 120 or 140 acres that you have, how many acres of food plot and how much switchgrass?
There's probably about 10 acres of food, about 25 acres of switchgrass, about 30 acres of wooded cover, a 25-acre ag field, and then like a 10-acre pasture and home site outbuildings. I don't know if that totals 120, but that's a guess.
If this question don't stump you, I don't know what will. When you were hunting Mel, and he's coming in, and you got the perfect shot, but he decides at that moment to do the nasty with a doe, would you wait until he's finished and take your chances, or would you shoot him then?
Well,
remember, he's only 4 years old, so that might take a little bit longer than an older buck.
I think I'll sit and enjoy the show till it's over.
That's weird.
Well, it may be weird, but we're passing on them genes.
That's a funny one.
I've hunted 46 years, and I had never seen a buck breed a doe until this season, first time. So
he told us that last summer, and I couldn't believe it. As much time as he's in the woods, I
was looking at my video camera. I was even going to film it, but they went behind. They went behind the tree where my autofocus started focusing on tree branches, and that was the end of that.
We get Steve to put some real interesting music behind that footage when we played on Whitetail Master Academy. Yeah.
I would have, the video camera would have been running. We'd have made a real interesting Mel video.
And hopefully
he would have proven himself to be the king buck then.
Hopefully a good video in another 5 years, too.
Yeah.
All right, where we got? In the back?
Yeah, hey, Terry, could you please demonstrate that Seprotect underwear you've been talking about?
Oh, it finally came, the underwear question.
That's all you. That's not me. I'm still wearing the same underwear I wore in high school, so I'm out of this one.
All right, so I got bunch of weird looks. So we had a question right before Christmas. These people were questioning and it was name something to ask for Christmas that wasn't deer hunting related, and I recommended my favorite pair of underwear called Sepratech on the podcast. So since then, but I'm not going to demonstrate it, but there is something I need to show you. Ray and Aiden found us a little rental house here in town, and after Don left this morning, I snuck in and got into his suitcase.
No, he did not.
And I found a pair of these breeches in there with this big king buck on the front there. And so these aren't Sepratech underwear, but I guess the king buck killer's got king buck underwear. It might be inappropriate, but I'm not sure if that's a booner or a boner, but I might have to edit. My mom's going to hit me with a cane and when she listens to this.
She needs to.
Does that answer your question?
So Terry said that he would model those if someone would make a $500 donation to Lester's Feet.
Please don't do that. All right.
Anybody got $500?
Move on. Quickly. Where's the next question? Because there's a coworker of mine standing up in the back, and I would not put it past him.
And I don't think any of us want to see that anyway.
Just donate for the goodwill of donating, not seeing me in underwear.
We just ate.
Yep. All right. What you got?
I have a question on cull bucks. How important is it? I saw on the video where you said, I believe you passed on Mel and you shot an older buck. How important is it to cull those, or weren't you worried about that buck pushing Mel off of your farm or away from your farm?
I don't think, well, first of all, that was not a cull buck. That was a 6-year-old buck. He scored 167 inches. Not one of my biggest, but I wouldn't call him a cull buck either. I wasn't worried about it. I think there's too much bad information out there, and both on the internet, hunting magazines, and everything else about property management. I've just seen so many things that are just totally opposite of what is being preached to us. And one of those is that a small property cannot hold multiple mature bucks. They just all need their space. And I haven't seen that at all. Even during the rut, I've seen 3 or 4 bucks that are mature, 4 years and older, feeding in the same food plot, small food plot together. They've got the pecking order worked out. They want to be in the safest place possible. They don't care if there's 5 other mature bucks bedded on the property. If that's the safest place in the neighborhood, they'd rather deal with that buck that's above them on the totem pole than they would to go deal with a bunch of human pressure. So I think there's probably too much made out of that bully buck, social status of the bucks, pecking order, all that business. I think the human intrusion factor overrides so much more than what we realize.
So we had a couple bucks on our farm. We knew they were 4 years old at least. We got the farm a couple years ago, and I guess we have some younger bucks coming on that are bigger than they were at 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. So my question is, how important is it to get rid of those older bucks? We have some boys that hunt the farm and would like to shoot those bucks. Is that a good idea, I guess is my question.
I think it's a good idea, but I think when it comes to managing a property, first of all, the property's going to have to lay out really good for you to have a big impact through culling on your property. Now, when we talk about culling, we're not talking about improving the genetics. What we're talking about is influencing which bucks on your property make it to the next age class. And we do that by deciding which ones we're going to shoot. And in a wild herd, typically the best bucks in each age class are the first ones shot. So a guy sitting in his stand and 2 3-year-olds walk out, and one of those 3-year-olds is a 120-inch 8-pointer and the other one's a 150-inch 10-pointer. Well, 99% of the time that 10-pointer is getting busted. and the 8-pointer gets to move on to the next age class. Well, on my farm, it's isolated. I'm kind of surrounded by open ag fields. Now, I lose bucks. I lose bucks. Those of you who are going to be at the class on Saturday, I'm going to show you some of the bucks that were alive on my farm this year. We're going to go down it. And 2 of those were lost to neighbors. So I lose bucks to neighbors like everyone else. But when you own a property that you can have some influence on which bucks are making it to the next age class, because let's face it, a lot of properties, your neighbors are going to influence it every bit as much as you are, and maybe even more, especially if you have neighbors all around you that are shooting deer. So on a property that we can influence, let's just say I've got 6 3-year-old bucks on my farm. I want to kill the smallest 4. I want the best 2 of those 3-year-olds to live to the next age class. And the way I came up with that years ago, when I started managing the property, I was trying to get every buck to maturity. Every buck was protected. Until he was a giant, he was protected. Well, what happened was I would lose the best bucks in each age class. I was left with the worst ones in each age class. And I'm sitting there thinking about, I'm a farm boy. I've raised livestock all my life, and I'm sitting there thinking one day in my stand, it's like, a cattle farmer, he doesn't just let the worst bulls and the bull calves, he doesn't keep them for breeding. They get made into steers and a hamburger. And I thought, what I need to start doing is I need to start keeping the best ones and culling out the worst ones. And over the last, 2 decades, it's had a noticeable impact. When I started on that property years ago, every year, the best buck I would have would be about 150 incher. That was about the top on my farm. And then about every 3 to 4 years, I'd get one a little bit bigger, about a 170. Well, today, after doing this for 20 years, today I've got multiple 170s every single year. And then about every 3 to 4 years, I get a giant. So I shot Smokey in 2017. 3 years later, I shot Mel in 2020. Next year, this is 2023, and the buck I just showed you, he's going to be my giant this year. But I've raised the top end bucks on my farm by about 20 inches from where it was 20 years ago through culling. And, I thought I was really on to something, and then I forget what podcast it was. I think it was 31 or 32, somewhere in there. We had Dr. Bronson Strickland on. And I explained what I'd been doing on my farm to him. I said, do you think there's any merit to this approach I've had with managing the bucks on my farm? And he says, well, not only do I think it has merit, I wrote a book on it. And they'd been doing it in Texas. And I didn't know that. I just, sitting in my stand thinking, I came up with, I need to start doing that. But I'm going to be the first guy to tell you that most properties, that's not going to work. Your neighbors are going to have way more influence on the bucks that make it to the next age class than you do. And probably what's going to happen is if you've got those 6 3-year-olds on your property, the neighbors are going to shoot the best 2. And who knows what's going to live. It's just up to chance. It's all luck on who makes it to the next age class. So I'll be the first to admit that, and I didn't plan it that way. It just fell into my lap that my property is way better than I thought it was going to be when I started. And, some of it was just things I learned over the years, and some of it was just the good Lord looking out for me.
All right, next question.
On the CWD, I raise deer, and we get blamed for everything that happens with CWD. We test 100% of our deer, and the DNRs only test, less than 0.5% of the deer. So, of course, we're going to find more than they do. And what is, my opinion is that the government, like you said, they're giving out millions of dollars for research and whatever. And if there's a cure, if they'd quit testing it, it would go away. Quit throwing money at it. It wouldn't go away, but it wouldn't have an impact on the deer herd. Is that what I thought I heard you say?
I think it's a political disease. I think this is actually Scripture being fulfilled. In the end times, bad is good and good is bad. The government's a stinking wreck. I mean, it's biblical. In the end, good is bad, bad is good. I haven't even really cut loose yet.
Well, go ahead, cut loose.
You got to ask me the right question.
I'm out of this one tonight. I'm not priming the pump. That's your all's job tonight.
You gonna draw for the gun there?
Do you want me to do it now?
It's
8 o'clock because some people maybe have to leave. There's a lot of them in here. I'll let you do it.
What am I supposed to do? Read the number on this thing, or
should be a number? It might be a name, but I think it's a number. Can an old man read?
I don't have my reading glasses, but I think this number is 283-7098.
You got it.
Got it. Winner back there.
Got a winner.
Winner, chicken dinner.
Congratulations.
Thank you for donating.
Joe Biden, thanks you for your support.
Don, three tips on a 16-year-old just starting out hunting. What are the 3 most important tips you could give him?
Basically get away from other hunters. Don't hunt where there's other hunting pressure as much as you can. Find a mentor, someone who's successful, and hopefully they'll take you under their wing. And keep your priorities in order. Worship the Creator, not the creature.
You got one in the back?
On your rope scrapes, would you recommend putting that on a community scrape that you're already using, or is it better just to let it go?
I think you could if you did it this time of the year. You know, you don't want to put those ropes out in the summer, even or right before season. That rope needs several months to weather. This is the time of the year right now to be hanging those ropes for next year. I don't think you're going to gain much. I mean, the buck's are already using it, so I think the potential for negative is much greater than the potential for positive. I don't think they're going to hit it any harder because that rope's there.
Okay.
This one someone sent in. A hunter uses a fair amount of scent control. Wind is, say, 5 miles per hour. How far away downwind would you say the buck has to be not to pick up the scent?
There's way too many variables there. I mean, what's the thermals doing? What's the humidity? On a day with higher humidity, they're going to smell a whole lot better. Scent control measures are a joke. That whole industry is a farce. We as hunters, I shouldn't say we because I'm not doing it, but the hunting community spends millions and maybe even billions. I don't know how many dollars they spend on scent control measures. So let me ask you, how many people here uses some sort of scent control? Spray, scent lock clothing, whatever.
Be honest. It's okay.
Everybody's hands in the air just about. Everybody's honest. How many of you have been winded? There, everybody's hands in the air again. You just wasted your money. It's a joke. You either play the wind or you get smelled. And you still might get smelled, but if those things work, why do you keep spending your money on them?
Could you explain to a 16-year-old how you play the wind?
It's going to be hard to explain, but I've got a video out about it. But the wind needs to be almost right for the buck and almost wrong for you. There's a company that a few years ago had a advertising slogan, "Forget the wind, just hunt." Well, I guarantee that's terrible advice, because a mature buck is never going to give up the wind. He's going to move on a wind that he feels comfortable. So if a buck is bedded here and he wants to feed back there, a mature buck is not going to want to go up there with the wind at his back. He's also, if the wind is directly in his nose, that's not even the best for him. He wants a wind quartering into his nose, not straight in his nose, but quartering into his nose. So if you know the path he's taken from point A to point B, and you know that he wants that quartering wind, well, you can get off to the side of the trail, and it's almost wrong for you, but it's right because your scent's blowing off to the side of where he's traveling. That's it in a nutshell. I mean, I could take you to the woods and spend an entire day picking out different trees for stands and explaining why it's a good tree because of how the buck would be using the wind. There's a whole lot more to it than just being scent free. Even if you're scent free, you need to know how that buck is using the wind. And that's one of the things on the master course on my home farm that we do is we go and look at about a dozen stands on my farm and then another farm that I've hunted for a lot of years. And I explain this is why this tree works. Because the bucks are doing, the wind is this way. Every time I hunt this tree, the wind is this way. And the buck is comfortable coming by here because the buck is doing this. And for me to answer that question, without any sort of whiteboard or something to draw on is about impossible. That's the best explanation I can give.
If you can ever find old articles from Al Foster was one of the first ones that really dove into that. And I think what was the term he said? The slice of the pie. You're taking the property and looking at it like it's a slice of the pie and being in the right slice. If you're one slice off, you're in the wrong spot, and it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So each buck has a personality. Have you ever seen a mature buck being careless with wind?
The thing about managing your property is the better that property is managed, the more a mature buck will let his guard down and move in daylight. That's why public land is so hard to hunt. It's because you got all these people out there just wandering here, there, and everywhere. There's no rhyme nor reason to what these people are doing. Everything is pressured. If you've got a property that you're managing right with a sanctuary, those bucks are going to move in daylight a whole lot more than they will on a highly pressured property.
You ready? Oh, go ahead.
Hey, I had a question for you. On a freshly clear-cut property, how do you go about finding the way the deer are now using your property in the new movements?
I make them move where I want them to. So if you got a fresh clear cut, you got, treetops and logs and stuff laying everywhere. Go in there with a skid loader and you create a path of exactly where you want those deer to be. If you got one tree on the edge of that where you've got good access to get in and you can play the wind and everything, well, go in there and push out a trail through those dead treetops right past that tree. And that goes right back to what I was saying earlier. I think most landowners that are deer hunters that are managing their property for deer don't fully take advantage of the opportunity they have to make their property better. They're just wanting to take advantage of what the deer are already doing instead of making the deer do what they want them to do. And I would make those deer walk through that clear cut the way exactly where I wanted them to.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, back in the back.
So this gentleman wants to know which you would prefer, rage or muzzy broadheads.
Well, I guess that depends on whose mustard highway I'm shoving them up.
Oh, jeez. Garbage.
Boat anchors.
Hey, Don, do you know what mouse walks on two legs?
What mouse walks on two legs?
Yep, 5 seconds.
What's that?
You've got 5 seconds to answer it.
What mouse walks on two legs?
I feel like
I guess a dancing mouse. I don't know.
It's Mickey Mouse. So that was Mickey Mouse. So what duck walks on two legs?
All of them?
They all walk on two legs, don't they?
Yeah, you were supposed to say Donald Duck.
Oh.
Well, he does too. Yeah. The king duck.
The king duck.
Hey, Don, I got a question for you.
All right.
So we're hosting this tonight, and you've consulted quite a few properties for us, and you got the master course. When are Ray and I going to be turned loose on your farm like Terry Pier?
Oh.
I agree.
I want to tell you something. The amount of anxiety you have when you're by yourself hunting his farm and the biggest buck in your life ever walks in front of you and you have to not even be tempted to pick up your bow. And then he says, oh, shoot a management buck. And what if that management buck is bigger than anything you've ever shot anywhere else, but it's one of the 3-year-olds he once left? I'm telling you what, it's stressful and it comes with a responsibility that I do not take lightly. There's a few of us that's had that privilege, but it's not easy. I make him show me many, many pictures before I go out there to make sure I know exactly. And then when you're in doubt, you don't shoot.
I'll let you guys come hunt next week if you want.
Where's that buck bedded?
Yeah.
All right. Which one of you got one? We're probably going to go about another 15 minutes at the most. So get your questions in, flag them down.
I have 3 quick questions, and I think I know the answer to a couple of them. But I'm new to the podcast, about 12 weeks, but I've listened.
You got to tell this story because I'm apologizing in advance.
Yeah, no problem. I started listening to podcasts in the middle of October, and I started at episode 138 and listened to that, and I just really enjoyed the biblical references and just the peacefulness in it, because there's so much crud out there. So after listening to that one, I started at number 1 and then just kept up to date as you brought them out, and it took 12 weeks to get through.
He listened
all
to
the
every
questions
single one
and
of
all
the
the pods. So, but you've hit on this question for the DNR, and it was something about what would make Ohio the best state. And I know one of them was if it wasn't supplemental feeding or baiting, I think you called it. So was there anything else besides that, or can you clarify more about
that? What would make Ohio the best state?
Yeah.
Well, the corn piles is absolutely it. And, you know, we discussed this today, too, Ray and Aiden and I. I've got mixed feelings about the corn piles, to be honest, because I think if Ohio got rid of the corn piles, Ohio would be the best state in the nation for big bucks. No doubt about it. You guys have got the genetics. You've got your gun season out of the rut. You've got a 1 buck limit. You got a lot of things going for you. A lot of young bucks get killed on those corn piles, but at the same time, take that deer management out of it. You've got people, I told my story earlier about how poor I was when I was younger. And if you got a guy that's only got 5-10 acres or whatever, doesn't that guy deserve a chance to have a good hunt too? So, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages both ways. And I don't want to turn this into a rich man's sport, and that's the way it's headed right now. So if a guy is not allowed to put his corn out, it becomes who has the biggest food plots wins. And I'm a guy selling food plot seed, so, hey, I'll sell you all you want. But at the same time, I think we need to recognize that not all of us have the same opportunities in life, And today I'm extremely blessed. God has blessed me, my businesses, with my family, and given me this platform, and I don't take it lightly. I appreciate every one of you people more than you'll ever know. And I don't ever want anybody to think I look down on them just because I remember what it was like to be on the bottom. I don't look down on anybody. God didn't make me better than anybody. So who am I to say that this guy that owns 10 acres should not be able to put out a corn pile? He should sit there and have a terrible deer season and probably not even kill a deer. So it's a double-edged sword that I'm not taking a side on.
Yeah, so one of the things you're talking about is the feeders, and you like the gravity fed better than the spinners.
Mm-hmm.
So listening to the podcast, I actually use most of the products that you guys do also. Just happen to be that way, and kind of a coincidence. But the opposite thing that I have is I use the spinner, but I keep it on low so it's not broadcasting 30 feet past the spinner. And I just felt, one, the deer eat. I know they eat off the ground and not on the off the ground shrubs and stuff at their own level. But my thinking of it was because it spreads the deer out a little bit rather than all trying to fight between a tube and you're trying to get a shot if you are at the feeder hunting. So I just thought what's your little more detail on why you like the gravity fed better.
Well, I think for one thing, it keeps that food off of the ground. When you got a feeder of any kind, you got all that deer traffic, and I just think it's healthier for that deer to be eaten in a feeder instead of off of the ground in the mud or whatever.
If you had my turkey population, you would not want it on the ground.
That's the other thing. You got the coons, the squirrels, the turkeys, everything else fighting over it. When it's in that tube, you can get a higher percentage of it to the deer. It's just a personal preference. I'm not. You make a good rational argument for a spin feeder.
I think the one benefit of a spin feeder is you can put it at certain times and actually suppress nighttime feeding and create more of a competition for what food is there that day, and do it a little bit earlier in the day. That's one of the advantages of it. We're not sponsored by it or anybody, but about 6 years ago, Redneck came out with their big gravity feeder with an auger inside of it where you could time it dropping down into the feed head. And I believe, don't quote me on it, but I did a quick walk past it when I was up at ATA this year, and I think they're finally bringing that to market. So in that case, that would be the best of both worlds, is when you could time when feed dropped into the feed heads, do the same thing, but not put it on the ground.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking that, because I have a timer feeder in southern Ohio, actually down close to where you were on one of your podcasts. You mentioned it, and I kind of did a double take when you were saying that. It was like you were in my backyard at one point.
I was. You just didn't know it.
Yeah, right. You might have been, because I wasn't there. But so my last question is, and it's one I don't think anyone's ever asked in the podcast before, and I don't know how difficult it is or what, but it's the term the piebald deer.
Mm-hmm.
And what might cause that, or is it sort of like some people have more freckles than others, or type of thing? What causes some to be white and not?
It's genetic. Yeah, it's all genetic.
Luck of the draw. Okay. Hang on 1 second. He's getting ready to. Go ahead.
Question is for Terry. So if you'd have a pick between two things and you'd have to give up one of these two, and it would be between Little Debbie cookies or Separate Take underwear, which would you be willing to give up?
I'd go commando and eat my Little Debbie.
So the next question is for Don. So Don, if Joe Miles with Osseo Gear, if he would come up with a pair of underwear in Osseo Gear, what % chance do you think it would be of Terry switching from Separate Take to Osseo?
Terry's into underwear. I think he's got an underwear collection at home.
Why? I would hope I have an underwear collection. I don't wear the same ones every day.
Not hanging on your wall, though.
I never would have guessed the underwear. That's almost as bad as the Love Swing taking a life of its own when we were making fun of Wes for his tree saddles. It's. We need to make a T-shirt or something.
We are very loyal to our sponsors. We get approached. Believe it or not, we get approached by a lot of companies we turn down because we don't believe in their products, or we just won't promote anything. So I'm going to guess that Terry's going to wear the Osseo underwear.
You'll never know.
We hope.
Tough to follow up on the underwear discussion here, fellas.
It's going downhill quick. You better bring it back. Circle it back in, buddy.
I'm going to do my best. First of all, congratulations on Mel. What a great story, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
One question that I had as you started to talk was, you mentioned when you had your farm, you thought that it had potential, but clearly it's exceeded your expectations, right? What were the, top 3 things that you did or you identified as you just started to get into managing that property, and that had the largest impact for the hunting and for the management of that property that you did?
Well, I'm in an area where cover is limited. Cover is the weakest link, and I just created as much cover as I possibly could, both with CRP tree plantings and switchgrass, native grass plantings. I created cover because you needed the cover to hold the deer, and basically in my area, if you've got cover, you've got deer. If you don't, you don't have them. So I provided the cover, but then I put food sources right against that cover to hold them there. And I didn't know what I was doing when I started. There wasn't all the information there is today on the internet. Hunting magazines weren't talking about management that much at that time. It's really exploded in recent years. And I made a lot of mistakes. Most of what I learned because I did it wrong the first time, and probably the second too. But eventually I got it right, and I tried to learn from my mistakes just like I do with my hunting. Yeah, I've killed some giants, but I'm telling you, there's been a lot of giants that have slipped through, and I never even got to lay eyes on them. So I tried to learn from my mistakes, but creating that cover was probably the biggest thing I did building that property.
All right, we're going to take about 3 more and then call it quits.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for saying it as it is. And Don was saying that he hasn't cut loose yet, so I got a question.
Okay.
Would you rather eat dinner with Tom from Michigan or Joe Biden?
Well, I have ate dinner with Tom, and I don't care to ever do that again. I guess Joe Biden and I are going to talk politics.
Oh, boy.
You're going to have to bleep that one out. We're going to get sued.
The 500 people that are in this room right now are the only ones that are going to hear that one. That's going to be, folks, that's going to be the first post-production edit of anything that we've ever put on the podcast. So, wow. He went all for that $100 on that one, didn't he?
I think he won.
All right, 2 more here.
Don,
where we at?
In the back.
Around my hunting property, where I hunt, during the summer I go on my bike and I bike around the property about a mile area and I see all the different bucks. And what are the couple different signs that I could read on these deer to figure out which one is the king buck?
Well, there is actually, it happened here in Ohio. There's a way to kill, there's a way to know the king buck. And you should ask Terry this because he explains it a whole lot better.
It's not the way you find the king buck. You verify that he's not the king buck. That's what he was saying. If you ever get a trail camera picture of a buck with his back leg up, that is not the king buck because the king buck would never expose his genitals. So if you ever get a picture with a back leg up, that is not the king buck. Keep looking. So that's what we heard in a seminar. We heard that in a seminar one time down in Mount Hope. So
true story.
We are 100% dead serious with that. So if you see a buck at any time, not that there's a camera there, at any time he will never lift his back legs up and show his nuggets to anything.
And people bought this dude's book. Yeah. After the seminar, they lined up to buy his book.
All right.
I don't get it.
All right, Ray or Aiden, you got 2 back there, and then as soon as you get done, I want you to come up here for just a quick second. Get him right now.
First of all, thanks for coming out and sharing the evening with us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
My question is on bachelor groups. Don says, he doesn't have bachelor groups on his property in the summertime. So what makes bucks bachelor in the places they do?
So Mother Nature, as a God, really, when he created every creature, he had a plan for their survival. And in the whitetail world, in the springtime, when the fawns are born, the does take the prime cover to raise those fawns. And the bucks in my area, the bucks literally live out in the ag fields, the corn, soybean fields, especially if you got like a grass waterway. I've got all kinds of does raising fawns on my place. I got the best habitat in the whole area, the whole township. And in the summer, I'm just loaded with does raising their fawns. That doesn't mean I have a doe factory, by the way. But Mother Nature has ingrained it in these animals to do what they need to do to ensure the survival of that species. So the does take the prime cover to raise their fawns, and the bucks just get in these bachelor groups in the secondary cover. Open woodlots is another place where bachelor groups like to be. If you're in an area with a lot of woods, a lot of times the thick covers where those does are going to be raising their fawns, and the open woods are going to be where the bucks are in their bachelor groups. It's all part of God's plan. He knew exactly what he was doing when he created everything.
All right. You've been polite this whole time, raising your hand every time, so I told him to make sure he got your question in.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I had the same experience this year. It was a little bit different for me. I had no bucks running 13 cameras on my property all summer except for one 13 point. had plenty of does and fawns. I'm surrounded by hundreds of acres of corn and beans. I didn't plant any spring or summer food this year, and I waited till the fall to do that. Do you think that contributed to the lack of bucks, or do you think it was just cover issue? I mean, I know it's kind of a broad question, but.
Well, you described pretty much my area with all those ag fields, and that's where the bucks go around me. I mean, I've got places where I know every year I can go and there's going to be a bachelor group in this section in these fields. There's going to be another bachelor group over here in this section. And year after year after year, they just go to those same spots. And, you know, some of those bucks get killed and new bucks join the group. I just think that that's where the bucks want to be.
I apologize. Do I try to compete with the big ag fields by planting something in the spring and summer, or wait until late summer, early fall?
Do your bucks show up in the fall?
About that third week of August, they come from everywhere.
You've got the ideal situation. I'm the same way. I don't have anything there hardly as far as bucks in the summer. But in the fall, as those bachelor groups start breaking up, the bucks start showing up.
But here's the thing. We talked about this last night at the table also. We have he and I have every resource for nutrition and food that we can get through the company, right? And we were talking about last night. We don't remember one single year that both our spring food plots and our fall food plots flourished. So if to say I only want to plant fall because the spring's a waste of time for a row crop, if we have a fall like we did last year in some parts of this country, if you didn't plant anything in the spring, you don't have anything in the fall. So you're basically just upping your chances by having two different styles there and hoping Mother Nature cooperates for one. And that's coming from two guys that have every available resource at our disposal. We can't remember a year here recently where we've had both spring plots just absolutely hammer on and had great fall plots. It's been kind of one or the other. You watch that video of him shooting Smokey, that food plot was all deadly dozen because his beans got burnt up.
If I can sneak one more in.
Yeah, go ahead.
How much corn? How many acres of corn?
If it's our corn, as much as you can.
Yeah,
it's going to get hammered. Yeah. It's going to depend on deer numbers.
Yeah, a lot of variables.
He's got a third of the number of deer that I do. I have to plant so much more than he does, but he's also got around. You know, we talk about the checkerboard. Your farm is the checkerboard. What's around you? And he gets so much more dispersal and has thousands of acres of food plot until harvest, and then it centralizes. I'm the only food except for cattle farmers raising alfalfa all summer. So my number of deer there is just completely opposite of what his is. I'm there in the spring because it's the only thing. So it's gonna. There's too many factors. Your deer numbers and what's around you is going to dictate that. All right, Aiden, what you got back here?
The question I have is going back to like the fair hunting. Like, how far should you be from your neighbor's food plot? And then also, just to make it fair, you know, like I like my neighbors, so I want to make sure that my food plot isn't competing with his food plot. And then also, should they be the same type of food plot, or should they be two completely different food plots, types of food plots?
Well, every situation's different. Every property's different. Are you talking about from a ethical standpoint, or
just talking about like just having a fair hunt for both of us, so that you know we're not necessarily competing at the same place.
I've never had a neighbor like you. I can tell you that.
Yeah, you're rare.
Move out here, you'll experience it.
Yeah, I think the neighbor is another variable. If you've got a good neighbor, which is rare, we're all bad neighbors, by the way. We're all bad neighbors to somebody. Somebody thinks we are a bad neighbor. I guarantee you, my neighbors think I'm a bad neighbor.
Well,
some of them.
You threatened to kill their dog this week.
I didn't threaten to kill their dog. I did not threaten to kill their dog. I just said I was going to take care of the problem. You know, the situation's variable. If you're working with your neighbor and you've each got one food plot, then I would say you plant something totally opposite. One of you have grain, one of you have greens. Next year you switch it up, and if you can work with your neighbor, I absolutely encourage you to work with your neighbor. I just think too many times that's not an option because one guy is way more serious about it than the other. It's very rare that both guys are on the same level as far as their commitment to success. And if you're there, that's fantastic for you and your neighbor.
Yeah, we are. But what would be the distance? What would be a good distance to have the food plots, separated by?
Well, we just did. It hasn't even been released yet. We just did a video on the Whitetail Master Academy on 2 properties in Ohio that I just consulted on in December. Those 2 properties are side by side, 2 neighbors that get along great, just like you described. And in that situation, and a lot of it depends on the lay of the land. I mean, not every property can you put the food plot where you want to. You've got the lay of the land dictates where you have to put it. But in that particular situation, what we did was we made the sanctuary right where those 2 properties joined. And then each guy had food on the other one, and they're both pulling from that sanctuary in opposite directions. The video is going to be fantastic, but you're going to see that situation from an aerial. You're going to see it all laid out on an aerial, and one guy can hunt certain winds better than the other guy can hunt the same winds, but they really have one centralized sanctuary that they're pulling their deer from. And if that is possible, that would probably be the best, because then neither guy is really hunting the property line. Each guy is really hunting about as far away from that joining property line as they can as they pull deer different opposite directions from it.
All right.
Thank you.
One more. He talked me into it. I got to edit out the part about the dog I just said too, so we got time.
So if you got a mature buck coming in on a corn pile after dark, this time of year, late January, what are the odds that putting out just a little bit of doe and heat scent might get him fired up to come in during the daylight hours?
What are the odds? Just a little bit better than 0. It's not very good. I mean, well, first of all, I've got basically 0 experience hunting over a feeder or corn or anything like that because we can't do it in Illinois. Here in Ohio, where I do own a property in southern Ohio and have had other properties in Ohio, we've had food, but we've used that food basically to hold deer on the property to compete with the neighbors that are feeding too, so we got to feed. But we have food plots on all those properties that I've ever been associated with, and I personally have never hunted over food like that, bait pile or whatever you want to call it. I think the whole doe and heat thing almost goes to the level of the scent control products I was talking about. So much of that is garbage that we waste our money on. I have very little faith in it, although I had, if you've seen the Joey video where I shot the Joey buck back in 2020, that buck, I was pretty confident where he would, if I seen him on that hunt, I knew where I was going to see him. And it was really, really thick cover, really thick. And I had one hole to shoot through. And I needed, in November when them bucks, especially in the morning when them bucks are moving, usually they're moving at a pretty good clip. And I seen him coming. He was moving at a pretty good clip. And I knew I needed to, if it happened, I was going to have to stop him in that hole for me to get a shot at him. And so I went in there with like a 4-ounce bottle of Smokies doe and heat. And I just splashed that stuff, the entire bottle, everywhere in that spot. And that buck, he's trotting along, and he hits that scent, and he locks up. And when he did, it was too late because I seen him coming, and I was already at full draw. He locked up in that spot.
He wasn't there because of the scent.
He was not there because of the scent. The scent just made him lock up and stop where I wanted him to stop.
So you've got 2 40-acre properties that you recently purchased.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little bit more Tony LaPrette's size. Are you going to be consulting with him to manage those properties?
Well, one of the 40s joins my current farm. Now, there's nothing been done to it yet, but that's one of the reasons I'm not going to have a class on the property next year. I've got a bunch of habitat work to tie it into what I've already got going on the 120. The other property, no, I won't be.
Tony's a good guy, though. We like
Tony is a great guy. I don't agree with a lot of his philosophy, but I don't think he's out there intentionally misleading people like some of the characters that are out there.
All right, I think we're done. Guys, for you guys to take a Thursday night and come out here, you don't know how much that means to us. I still can't believe there's more than 10 people in here that would come listen to us, talk like this. So we truly do appreciate you. One more round of applause for Ray and Aiden. Thank you guys for what you're doing, how you've supported the foundation, and also made this opportunity available. We're going to stick around as long as you guys want to, so we're going to sign off here, and thanks for your support. We appreciate it.
God bless everyone. Have a great week.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo, Via Farm Real Estate Company, 360 Hunting Blinds, Victory Chevrolet, Real World Wildlife Products, Matthews Archery, Novix Tree Stands, Gingerich Tree Farm, WildlifeFarming.com, Quiet Cat, and Vortex Optics. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.